JavaScript, like virtually all modern programming languages, does not care about white space. And by white space, I mean spaces, tabs, line breaks. These are all regarded as insignificant. They're ignored. So if I have a file of JavaScript here with multiple statements in it, it doesn't matter if I start putting line breaks in between the lines, whether at the start or the end or in the middle. This has no impact on behavior whatsoever. In the same way, I've been starting every statement on the first character, but if I decided to put in a few tabs or a few spaces, that doesn't matter at all. The language just doesn't care. It's ignoring the white space and just reading the characters that do occur. It's ignoring the line breaks because we use the semicolon to tell JavaScript where the statement ends. In fact, because we do it this way, if I wanted to, I could actually combine multiple statements onto one line. There's no problem with doing this in JavaScript. It does make our code tougher to read, so I'm not going to do this. The general rule is one statement, one line, but we could do it that way. Even inside the statements themselves, white space is ignored. I could put multiple spaces between the different elements of that statement. Or on the other hand, I could actually get rid of a couple of those spaces. The rule here is don't confuse JavaScript and don't confuse ourselves. While I could have this line, var b equals 10, squeezed down about this much, I couldn't take it one step further and get rid of this space. Because now I'm confusing JavaScript. What does varb mean? It needs to be able to figure out where one part ends and the next begins. So I'll need a space between var and our variable name b. It's one of the reasons we can't have spaces in our variable names themselves. And what I don't need is a space between the variable name here, b, and the equal sign. And that's because JavaScript knows the equal sign is not allowed as part of the variable name, so this part must be separate. But best practice, there are spaces between the different elements, the different parts of your statement. The only thing that's typical is you don't use a space before the closing semicolon. Now, you could have one. This is perfectly valid JavaScript with one space or a dozen before the semicolon. But the way most people write JavaScript and other C-based languages is you just immediately close with the semicolon as soon as you can. It's just the way we finish the line, like using the period at the end of a sentence in English. White space, more than anything, is simply for readability. You start jamming all the elements up against each other, it becomes tough to read. So you use as many spaces as you need to make this clear. Now, there are a few customs that you may run into. Let's say we're using the ++ operator, and I'm just doing a ++ here. I could write this as a space ++, but by convention, a simple line like this is just written this way. But that takes us into one more point. There are two places that white space does matter. First, if we're using an operator that has multiple characters, like the ++ operator, this is one thing. While I could put a space between the variable name and the ++, and I could put a space between the ++ and the closing semicolon, I cannot put a space in between the two. And that's because as far as JavaScript is concerned, this is not two addition operators, it is one ++ operator, the increment operator, the ability to add one to a variable. So you can't put a space in the middle of that. Same with the --, same with operators like += or -=. You can't put a space in the middle of this, just the same way you can't put the space in the middle of var, or alert, or prompt, or a variable name. And the second place white space matters is inside a string. There's a difference between what space is space your space name and adding a few more spaces to it. And that's because we want spaces to matter inside a string. So when you're creating string literals, they will be regarded as significant. Now, one question might be, what if you want a line break inside a string? Well, for example, here, I might want to break the line between what is and your name. Now, it's an easy thing to think, well, I'll just split that onto another line because after all, we're ending the entire statement with a semicolon, so does this work? Well, no, it doesn't. You're not allowed to do it this way. JavaScript will get very confused about what's going on. If you want a line break inside a string, we have to give JavaScript a clue that this is what we're doing. Quite similar to adding the quotes inside a string by using the \. What we use is another \/ to say this is what's called an escape character. There's a special character coming up that means something other than regular text, and then I say \n. Now this looks a little weird. It looks like, what is your name? But as far as JavaScript is concerned, these two characters here are special. \n means new line. And I'm using this string literal in a prompt. So if I save this, let's test this one. Going to open up the HTML page that's pointing to this file. And as we can see here, the message is now coming out as, what is, line break, your name? I type in Simon, I click OK, and we get the rather ugly looking message, hello Simon. Well, that's simply because I'm concatenating or combining two strings together here. I've created a variable called message that says hello, and then I'm adding the word hello and whatever name was typed in and popping that up as an alert box. Well, really what I want is hello, comma, space, and then the name. So this would be another reason we would want this space regarded as significant, so that when we're combining strings together, they don't all jam up against each other. Saving that and trying that one again, we could just reload the page to try it again. We can see that now that space is being taken into account. Now, as we start writing more and more code, you'll often see a few blank lines. You'll often see lines indented with tabs or spaces. Again, JavaScript doesn't care. It doesn't pay attention to this. Whitespace has no actual meaning, no impact on what this code is going to do. But whitespace can be very useful for making our code more readable. And we'll see much more of that soon.